Hello, my name is Jenna Blumenfeld. I'm the product content strategist at Stream, and today we'll be talking about the do's and don'ts of interviewing customers to build great relationships with Senior Product Manager Veronica Hudson. Veronica, thanks for hopping in.
Thank you for having me, Jenna.
So I'd love to start off by understanding your background a little bit and kind of how did you become a product manager and what attracted you to this type of work?
Yeah, of course. So my first career was in book publishing, which I only did for a couple of years after realizing wasn't the right path for me. And by a number of kind of random jobs after that, ended up at a tech company that specialized in making social media software. This was at the beginning of kind of brands using social media. Not many people knew how to speak to an audience if they were, an Anheuser-Busch or Unilever per se. And our tool helped them figure out what to talk about and also how to publish that content. So I got in on the ground floor. I was probably employee number 10, and I acted in more kind of an account manager, CSM role. And I did that for a couple of years. And while I was in that role, I worked with the engineering team a lot because we didn't have dedicated product managers. So I was kind of helping them understand customers' problems, relaying customer feedback back to them, trying to identify overarching problems that we could maybe solve with a single feature. And after having done that for a couple of years, we hired our first product manager. And I was like, hey, I want to do that job. I didn't know that was a job. That's awesome. That's my favorite part of my current role. And so after, a few months went by, we hired a few more PMs. I had a good relationship with the co-founders, and I was just persistent and annoying enough that finally they said, all right, fine, we'll put you on the product team and see how it goes. And I have worked in product ever since. So yeah, came to this role from a very customer oriented focus. And I think I've carried that over through my tenure as a PM up to this point.
Awesome. So in that same vein, I'd love to know, why is it important for product managers to kind of develop and maintain great customer relationships for both, your work and also for the customer?
Yeah, totally. So there's a number of things to consider there. One is that the customer is going to have relationships with a lot of people at your company, just depending on, the type of software it is, how you sell it, et cetera. But, by the time they talk to a product manager, they may have talked to a salesperson, a support person, a CSM, onboarding specialist, product and pricing specialist. And so once they talk to product, they might not necessarily understand exactly what you do or why you want to talk to them. But once you can kind of get them to understand the role of product and how you really want to understand their problem and the problems they're trying to solve with your tool, you can really expand upon that relationship however you want from there. And having those close relationships, I think this is an issue that a lot of product managers have, especially at companies where the accounts are more managed, is that you need to go through someone else to talk to a customer. That's not always the case, especially at a B2C company, but for B2B companies, that is often the case. And so once you do have that rapport, maybe you've worked with an account manager to establish that relationship, it's a lot easier to then just take the onus of that on yourself and reach out to them anytime you want to dive deeper into a problem or understand how they're using the product in a certain way. Once they know who you are, they know why you're talking to you. It's a lot easier to continue to have that connection. And also people get really excited about product. Like, oh, this person has the ability to really influence what we're doing in the tool and features that we want to see in the future. You don't want to take that too far sometimes, but I think it really gives people an opportunity to feel like their voice has been heard and that their problems are being addressed by the product now and in the future.
Great. Awesome. So we're going to go into maybe the do's of interviewing customers for those relationships. So what are some of the top tactics that you love to use to interview customers? And I'd love to learn some specific questions that you use.
Yeah. So before I do any set of customer interviews, I think about what type of interview it is. So there are going to be interviews that you're just more kind of learning more about this customer, their day-to-day, what their problems are, and really digging into the problems that they're trying to solve. You're also going to have interviews that are more around a very specific problem. How are they solving this specific problem today, whether that's in your tool or not? And you're also going to have conversations that are around designs. Your designer might have already created something and you want to get feedback on it. And then lastly, I mean, this doesn't encompass everything, but kind of lastly, you will be asked to get on customer calls where the customer is potentially unhappy or wants to hear about what you're doing to solve a problem or what your roadmap is because they aren't satisfied with your current solution. So you always need to think about what that meeting is, because that will inform how you prepare for it. So that's kind of the second thing. You need to prepare going in. I like to think of a set of questions that I'm going to ask ahead of time. I like to understand who the customer is so I don't have to ask them questions we already know. We only have a set amount of time to talk to them. So if I know, for example, how many contacts they're storing, the size of their business, how many employees they have based off of talking to a account manager, getting that information from Salesforce, I just go in with that assumption. And yeah, so prepare a list of questions based off of the type of conversation it's going to have or you're going to have. And that is not necessarily questions I want to ask the customer specifically, but questions I want answered myself. So I will typically start more generally. And then as we go down that path, I'll dive into those specific questions. So in talking about specific questions, I've said specific like 80 times, but I like to think of them as, are you asking a specific question or a general question? Because you're going to get very different answers based off of that type of question. For example, if I want to know generally what a customer is doing in their day-to-day, I won't ask, what do you do in your day-to-day? I'll ask, what did you do yesterday? And have them start from the beginning of the day and go through their entire day. It's a lot easier to recall exactly what you did yesterday. And that's going to give you some, I think, richer detail than if you ask generally, because they'll just kind of gloss over like a list of their roles and responsibilities as opposed to diving into specifics.
Okay.
That being said, if it's an interview where you're looking at designs and you're talking through a solution, you don't necessarily want to be super specific and say, what do you think about this button? Or do you like the way that this flow works? You want to say, look at the screen. Tell me what you see. Like, what do you think about this? What would you do if you were to try to upload an image? And have them kind of take the reins, and then you can get more specific from there. So I like to think about like the actual problem we're trying to get into and what level of detail or lack of detail is going to get us there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love how you're kind of trying to get as specific as possible and kind of allow these customers to take the reins of the
It's almost like the broader the question space, the more specific you want the answers to be. Like if you're exploring a problem, a general problem, but then the more specific the solution, the broader you want the questions to be.
And how would you kind of ask if there's a new feature you're exploring, would you just say, hey, would you use this feature? Or how would you kind of see if a new functionality would be really valuable to a customer?
Yeah. So a lot of times I like to start from like a point of problem validation. So I'm learning more about the problem the customer is trying to solve versus the feature that will solve it for them. One of the things you run into as a product manager talking to customers is they want to tell you exactly what the feature they want is. And that feature might be specific to them, but it won't solve the problems of other customers. So you have to listen to the feature, then think about what all the other features customers like them have requested and say like, okay, what is the actual problem these people are all trying to solve? And take a step back. So when I get to the point of having a feature that I want feedback on, I feel like I already understand the problem somewhat well, or the problem they're trying to solve. So I wouldn't necessarily frame it as like tell me more about this feature. I would say, hey, we talked about this problem last time we met. I'm going to show you this design we've put together. Tell me how this might solve that problem that we talked about, as opposed to the specifics of the feature itself.
Okay, great. That's wonderful advice. So now I'd love to talk about some of the don'ts of interviewing customers to keep these relationships. What are your top no-nos?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically the opposite of what I said before, like don't point to something very specific and say, what do you think about this button? Or ask very broad, generalized questions. Don't go in unprepared. Don't just wing it, or you're going to walk away from the interview without really remembering what you talked about, or like have any artifact of that conversation or any real questions answered. In terms of other no's, let's see. I feel like I haven't had a customer interview that's gone like terribly wrong. I do think something to think about is a lot of times, and this is about more of your relationship with other people in the company. A lot of times product managers aren't brought in until there is a problem with the product. And at that point in time, you're coming in when the customer's already upset or they're frustrated and they think you're going to solve all their problems, and then you most likely can't. So the no there is more like, make sure that your organization is bring you into those customer conversations and relationships at a high point or a happy point where you can talk about positives, like in the onboarding experience, for example, so that when you do have that relationship and you do maybe get brought in into a meeting to talk about some known issues, they already trust you and they know you and they feel confident in being honest with you in that conversation about the problems that they're having.
Awesome. And then this is kind of more a general question about how to just build rapport with your customers. So it's like maybe a little of like a softer skill, but I mean, when you first get on the phone with them, do you kind of set aside, 2 minutes to kind of have like a light small talk, or are you kind of just like respecting their time and kind of dive in?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. One, yeah, I like to have a little banter up front. I like to bring, levity to every interaction I have as much as I can. Life's not all that serious. It's nice to have a little fun and get to know people. But yeah, usually I like some conversation about where they're based, especially now that so many of us are remote. A little conversation, if I've done the research ahead of time, which I should have, about their role and what they do on a day-to-day basis. And then another thing I like to do is throughout the interview, as we're talking about problems they're trying to solve or like tricky parts of a solution, just have empathy and kind of echo what they're saying. Because I mean, a lot of times I will say like, oh, I've heard that from so many other people. Like, oh, I used to work in marketing, and I can't even tell you the amount of spreadsheets I had to manage, and not doing it in like a fake or forced way, but like genuinely like recalling back to conversations you've had with other people or like experiences, that can also lead you down a deeper path of discussion about that specific problem. So yeah, like connecting early on, but then maintaining that kind of empathetic back and forth throughout the entire conversation.
Awesome. I love that. Well, those are all of my questions for you, Veronica. Thanks again for hopping on. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks.